think there's a new sort of breed of cert body that are more collaborative and more open to stuff. Because just the idea of doing a video like this previously with some other cert bodies, which I won't name, I mean, it would never have happened. They would never have given us the time of day, and they would not have seen it as of any value to them. And I think it's probably the same with consultancies. There's some very old school consultants out there still, which works for some clients, and that's great. But it seems like there's a similar kind of thread across the industry, consultants and cert bodies that are maybe engaging more or doing more to promote the industry rather than just themselves.
I think very, very much so. It's slowly changing from a certification body perspective, and only because newer and sort of different thinking certification bodies are coming on board. Some of the more sort of established certification bodies are sort of having to look at how they do things and how they engage with their client base. The event of social media has really prompted a lot of this as well, in the fact that even certification bodies are seeing the value of engaging with their client base, engaging with companies directly or the consultants to sort of say where their value lies. But it's been a slow transition. I say, having been in this industry for just over 17 years, where it was then to where it is now is a very different landscape. To be different or to sort of bring value. At Auva, we have always understood, and from all our past careers and experience, that we're there because the customer are paying for us to be there to help them achieve a certain standard. Now, that doesn't have to be a them and us situation. It doesn't have to be something where the client is dreading you coming in. I'm not under the illusion that anybody loves to have an audit, because that's just not the case. But it should be the case where they're actually going, okay, our audit's next week. That's great. Let's see what comes up, or where we can improve things, or how we're doing. It should be that conversation, not, oh no, they're coming in and they're going to try and find fault with X, Y, and Z. One of the first things I would say in audits, and I still do audits, is that, look, we're not here to fault find. We're here to help you meet the requirements of the standard that you want to meet. If there's anything that comes up, we will discuss and agree it with you before we move forward, because it could be that we're looking in the wrong place for evidence, and you guys will know your system and company far better than we ever will, and you're our guide. So if we're asking a lot of questions, it's not because we're trying to persecute you. It's really just to get our information to say that, yeah, everything's great, or there's maybe a few minor bits and pieces. And I think that attitude is so important. And that's where we bring our audit team as well, that understanding that you're there to help the company get where they want to be. So it's still impartial. You're not there to consult or anything like that. You're just there to audit against the requirements of the standard and say, yeah, yes or no, here are bits and pieces. I have come out of audits where major findings have been identified and agreed with the client, and everybody comes out smiling. And that sounds very strange, but it's because of your attitude to it. Very, very much so. I'm pointing out things maybe that are legal breaches that really will protect you as a company moving forward. And if you say it's very much about attitude, and I think new certification bodies and new auditors are really coming along with that kind of viewpoint, as opposed to more old school, when the 9001 standard was very heavily documented, and requirement level was very, very detailed, where there were procedures to send out your post, for example. And I've seen that in some companies. So, where the value wasn't there in the management systems. So a lot of this has been driven by the update in the standards as well, in the fact that they've become much more business friendly, much more business value friendly, if you like, all about risk management, which is language that organizations understand, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to remember that clients choose to put this in place, and they choose to go for the certification. It's not mandatory. not mandatory requirements. So in that case, everyone is working towards the same goal. I know there's often a lot of pressure from the supply chain for companies to do it, but it's still an optional thing. So to approach it perhaps as it was in the olden days, and you had all of those very detailed requirements that maybe people didn't feel that they wanted to sign up to. As you say now, with the risk-based approach and the new sort of style of auditor that's coming through, it is a much more pleasant experience, I think, for everyone, and you can see that benefit that people get from the standards.
Yeah, and I've seen consultancy practices sort of answer that end of your question, become much more driven in that way as well, like yourselves, where it's very customer focused and each system is very individual to the company and what they need and their industry type, instead of sort of a one size fits all, heavily documented, detailed management system that doesn't really reflect the organization and how they run. So it nearly runs in opposition to the company activities and operations. And so there's been a much stronger drive from consultants to really deliver for their clients. And then that leads in turn to a much smoother audit because you're meeting the requirements of the standard, but also very much the management system is part and parcel of what the company does, as opposed to something that sits outside of it. So yeah, it's been a definite change in the last sort of 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I would completely agree with that. I think it has moved from that kind of templated find and replace the company name, and often consultants would keep hold of all of those documents and just bring them out once a year. Whereas nowadays, what we try and do is really give the client ownership of what they're doing. And as you've already said, they're doing it and they're doing every day the business as usual stuff. So if we build it into that, they're doing it naturally. There's no extra requirement for them to meet. So that makes life a lot easier for them and a lot easier for us as well.
A lot easier for us as the certification body and the auditors, because you're not looking at something that you know is just being put together for your benefit. Another thing I say very frequently in audits is if you're doing it for me coming in, it's probably not bringing any value to you as a company. You know, everything that you do, and consultants have been fantastic in sort of driving this home with companies, is that you do it for a reason. And the reason should be very apparent in the value that it can bring you, or the protections that it gives you, or the risk management to sort of for preventative measures, you know. And so that has made things much simpler for companies to understand. But yeah, very much driven by the update in the standards as well.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, Paul. So you mentioned risk already, but the other thing I think has been really important is leadership. Because it's much harder now, I think, for clients to outsource ISO to a consultant or to anyone, because they really need to be brought into what's going on. And they need to know, the figures and the measures and what the objectives are. So it's much harder for the leadership and the top guys to escape an audit, I suppose.
Yeah, the update in that clause from management commitment to a leadership clause sitting in its own right across all of the standards has been really, really important, even as a tool for consultants or auditors to kind of drive home the message that this really has to start from top down. You have to be invested. And I suppose when it first initially came in, I have raised issues and non-conformances against leadership in the past. But funny, the management, once they get the value to it, have no problem with that. It might be a wee bit counterintuitive, that one, but absolutely. And as I said, when you raise findings in an audit, and I think it's really important for certification bodies, is just explain them really clearly to the point where even if it takes you 30 minutes on one point, you know, and using the terminology that the company uses and not, you know, we all would revert back to standard terminology instead from the 9001 or 14, but use, you know, the terminology used in the client's own system to explain why something is an issue, be it based on legal requirement or the ISO standard requirements. And as soon as you get that understanding and they get the benefit of what they'll get from the other side of doing something about it, you know, it makes it a very easy process for them. And I say it makes everybody's life easier. So I think that's really important, is that, you know, and I've said it a number of times in this interview, I'm sort of repeating myself, but see, that communication and having a relationship with the client where you can do that, I think is vital.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to have the cert body communicate what the issue is really clearly is important. And that's where consultants like us at Assent can add value as well, I think, because not only can we understand what the problem is alongside you as the cert body, but once you've gone and finished your report and that time boundary we spoke about, we can work with the client to look for the solution to that. And, you know, often we can bring in ideas and things that we might have seen work well in other places, obviously completely anonymous and confidentially, but share that best practice that you come across. So we can really help to resolve those issues for clients. Absolutely. As well.
I agree that I'm not an auditor, or we're not a certification body who will say, right, we're not speaking to the consultant in this audit, we're only speaking to the client. You know, you have to understand the consultant's role with the client in that collaborative process, in the fact that the client is reliant on the consultant for expertise and advice. And so they're obviously involved in the management system. And so that's who now, you don't speak to the consultant in isolation, obviously, because you need to see the company and the people involved in the actual management system. But, you know, you also can't exclude them because they're a resource that the company uses. And so when they bring that value, as you say, when auditor speak gets a little bit too much, the consultant will normally step in and also, you know, really help the client understand where the auditor's coming from. And that's a value for both sides, I think, very much.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all of our consultants try not to take over too much and try to let you guys do your work with the client. And often it's because we just don't have access to the level of evidence that you would need anyway. So the client needs to be there, needs to be involved. I definitely recognise situations where there's just been a miscommunication between the cert auditor and the client, and we've been able just to say, no, don't worry, what they're looking for is over here. And then it just puts the audit back on track and kind of settles everyone's nerves down a bit. Yeah. And works really well.
I think it helps Auva and our sort of body of auditors is a lot of us have started on the consultancy side. Okay. So I've been in the position of all the companies I go out to see, either as a client or as the consultant. I think that gives you a level of perspective on the relationships and the understanding of, you know, what's possible, what's not possible, and where concerns will lie and fears. You know, you talk very much about the client experience, and that, you know, nobody loves an auditor to come in, but it should be sort of a process where they're comfortable. And I think that comes across when they know that you have experienced exactly what they have. I think it lends a wee bit more sort of confidence that you're not going to come in to sort of annihilate them or find fault with everything they do.